Hi, this is Christopher Feldner, a training architect with Ukeru Systems. And like some of the episodes we've had in the past, so we talked to our team member, learning engineer Lana Ingram Gore. Of course, me and Kim have talked many times on the podcast. We have one with Allison, our performance architect. And now we have our first team member in the actual studio with us for a podcast. We have Angie Craig. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, if you would, for folks who haven't seen you, haven't talked to you before, who are you and what is your role with Ukeru?
So, I'm Angie. I'm the outreach engineer here at Ukeru. And what my job is when someone expresses interest in the program, if they reach out to the info email, I'm the person behind that and would start answering questions and hopefully getting on a call and talking through the program and helping an organization better understand why they may choose Ukeru and why it may be a good fit for the program, all the way through the registration process.
Gotcha. So, those of you who don't know Angie or haven't been around her before, I can honestly say, and I can't remember who I said this about you to. Maybe it was Kim. I said, Angie is probably the most genuinely positive person I've ever met.
That's the
Like,
kindest thing somebody could say, truly, because it's sometimes really hard to
oh,
be
I'm sure.
positive,
I'm sure.
and I'm sure
I
my
don't doubt it.
husband could tell you stories,
Well, we'll talk
but
about him a little.
perfect. Thank you.
But I think that for the role that you have, I was like, what a perfect fit for that type of role to do that, the outreach. Having done calls with potential customers before with you, you just have a very easygoing nature, as you're going to see as we talk here. So before we get into Ukeru, so give us a little background about your experience in our field.
Great question. Thinking about what I would talk about truly, and some of you who've been on calls with me have probably heard some of my story. When I went to college, I studied human development and
Hmm.
family studies. So I always had an interest in people and didn't really know what I was going to do with it. But right out of college, I started doing child protective services
Mm.
and to understand life, maturity, and things that were way bigger than me. I jumped in. And it was probably like looking back and thinking about some of the things that I saw, I was not prepared, but also was taught a lot of life lessons that I wouldn't want to change. So truly started off in child protective services in my career.
I wanna pause there for a little bit, or as some of our trainers would say during training, let's park here for a moment. Right? CPS.
Hmm.
Now, if
Yeah.
anyone that works with children, you know about CPS, CPS being called, investigations, like what what is it like working in CPS?
Well, and I'll talk about like my first job. So I was early 20s
Hmm.
and went into homes, and my first job was in the intensive unit. Why would I choose something that's not intensive? So I was in the intensive unit, which required us to visit our families
Yeah.
once a week and
Okay.
make safety assessments and decisions. And I had to remove children based on those assessments, not being a parent and being in my early 20s. This is when I think back going, "Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine how I hadn't experienced life yet, but I was making
Hmm.
life decisions for families
Yeah.
that were hard." And I think one of the most challenging things and real things was when I removed the first child from a home.
Mm.
And children love their parents, regardless of how they're treated. And I was coming in from the outside to make the decision that it was better to
Mm.
remove this child and then work with the families ongoing to hopefully reunite them and just powerful beginning phases of working with humans.
Yeah.
And I did it for several years. In fact, that's where I met my husband. He was a child abuse investigator, and I was a
Mm.
service worker. So we met at the job, and he was in his early 20s too. And I think that's when we started talking about changing the world. And hopefully, we put good back into the world through those conversations. But it was real stuff at a very young age, and
Hmm.
then got married and I went into the adoption unit, and after I was a parent, it was about 6 months in, I had another child along the way that was similar in age
Mhm.
to our child who had shaken baby, so
Mm.
brain injury. And I walked out of the house and from this situation, and I called my husband and I said, I can't emotionally do it anymore. I can't do it
Yeah.
one more day.
Well, and I was thinking about that, I feel like in a lot of ways, there's a perception that CPS is, an enemy, like they split families and all this stuff, but I imagine the amount of trauma of being the person that has to make some of those calls is tough.
And almost impossible sometimes because truly the families that I met over the years, never did I feel like they were bad people.
Mhm.
They needed help and support. And I always saw the best results from being their help and support rather than the enemy. And I think truly, I was going in neighborhoods in inner cities that I had no business being in, and then being a threat to that family. So
Mhm.
I learned very early that being the threat did not work. I had
Mhm.
to take a different approach. I'm small. I was young, and people needed help. So I just knew
Mhm.
at that stage, for my own safety and for the betterment of that family, I need to form a relationship so that the best case scenario could evolve from my involvement with the family.
Mhm.
And I saw that day after day, and I learned that it was necessary to do that work.
Okay. So where did life take you next?
After that, so I said, I can't do this one more day. And so my husband actually transitioned into education
Mm.
and was working at an exceptional center that served children with disabilities. And he got to stay home with our son for that first summer. And I was like, hold on. I can't emotionally do the work that I'm doing anymore.
Mhm.
And you get to stay home with our son. Also, not fair. So at that time, because my degree was so close to education and we were living in Florida at the time, I only needed to pass some tests and take a course to become a teacher.
Gotcha.
So at that point, I went into the education field and it was beautiful. I remember one of my first days in the classroom and going into the teacher lounge at lunch, and they're like, so, how do you like it? And I said, I can't believe I'm getting paid to sit at the carpet with kids and sing. Like it was just, it was like, it was the perfect transition at the time from a field that I felt like I was getting emotionally drained.
Mhm.
And this one fed my soul. And it was just the right place for me.
Well, we have a carpet right here if you'd like to
Right.
relive some of those singing days.
Yeah, it really was. I was sitting there singing with first graders, being like, this is the best job ever. I can't believe I'm getting paid for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was the right move at the right time that reminded me why I loved kids and their developmental stages. Well, a lot of them had tough stories at home.
Mhm.
I wasn't the one that had to make decisions based on their home
Right.
life. I
Right.
could be the positive in their day, and then I could go home at night and have the summers with our son. So it was a win-win-win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how have you seen in your time in education field, how did you see the field of education change for better, for worse over time?
Great question. So now is when my timeline, I don't want to get too messy with it, but I was in education about 17 years.
Okay.
And I started off in Tampa, Florida, in inner city school. And in Florida, I don't know if they still do this. At the time, they graded schools. I was at
Mm.
an F school
Oh, wow.
based on some standards and some of the high needs in the school that I was in. And it was really challenging. But again, I felt like I could be a positive and sing on the carpet and do good things, and had the freedom to do that. A
Mhm.
lot of great administrative staff. And then, but I was at a high needs school. So truly during that time, we would carry our cell phones. And in Florida, they kind of have an open school setting where we
Mhm.
would go outside, and if we heard gunshots, they would text us to return, or we heard them to
Okay.
return to the building. And even that was not, still wasn't panicky
Mhm.
or nervous. It was just part of the process and never felt unsafe. Was I? I don't know. But then wanted to have our second child, and we knew the northern schools based on some of our school experience. We knew we wanted to move back close to family. We're
Mhm.
in Virginia.
Gotcha.
And so that's when my husband was looking for an administrative job. And truly, it was going to be wherever he got the administrative job is where we would go, both in the education field. And that's when he got a job at Grafton
Mm.
and was an administrator there. And our family moved to Winchester. And I remember the interview at that school. I went in, and it was, to me, it was like this cute little country school. And I
Mhm.
sat in the foyer, and I remember the principal coming out going, "So sorry for all the chaos this morning. It's been one of those mornings." And I'm sitting there going, I
What chaos?
truly, yeah, it was like, I didn't hear anything
Right, right,
alarming. There was no arguments. I didn't see anything physical. I was like, if this is chaos, like, sign me up.
right, right.
So that's when we moved, and I was teaching first grade there at this little country school.
Mm.
And life was so, so good for many years as we were raising our kids. I can't say that those years were stressful because of the demands of teaching. I feel like it's a blur because we were raising two young children.
Right.
And then we had jobs that required a lot of energy. And it
Mhm.
was really, really good until I started to feel myself losing off. I think the word's authenticity in the teaching world, because the demands, and I don't know if that's the right word either, but the requirements
Mhm.
of some of the state testing thing was starting to get to me,
Mm.
and just the needs of what was coming through the door seemed to just get more and more and more. And truly, through that time period,
Mhm.
my husband was learning about Ukeru and the needs at Grafton,
Mhm.
and how to kind of shift that mindset a little bit, because I could feel myself. I'm a planner, plan for everything, maintain control,
Mhm.
which works until it doesn't work.
Right.
And then you have like these days you're like, well, I didn't have control of any of that. And I planned for everything and none of it worked.
Yep.
And so that's truly where, at night, a lot of times we go home, or maybe it's just us, we go home and try to talk about changing the world and all of the world's problems, and how can we be the good in
Mhm.
a world that sometimes doesn't seem to have a lot. And that's really when Ukeru started supporting me from
Mhm.
behind the scenes, because the school system I was working for didn't use
Mhm.
Ukeru. But truly, that comfort versus control was my self talk,
Mhm.
because I like control. I like everything where it's supposed to be.
Mhm.
But knowing that about myself, and then realizing I don't always have control, but what I do have control over is me.
Mhm.
And
Hopefully, right.
I hope. And then at
Right.
night I would go home and fall apart and maybe didn't have control, but that's what that's for, right? We all
Right,
need that
right.
time to fall apart.
Yep.
But it was not fair to do that for my kids.
Yeah.
And then I went from elementary to middle school and ended up teaching some amazing subjects and working with some incredible people who also had some tough stories but taught me wonderful things. But truly, I was teaching tech ed my last couple years of teaching,
Mhm.
and a lot of that involves shop and handing sharp things to people and trusting them with it, to
Mhm.
not only hurt themselves but also not hurt their peers,
Yep.
and then not hurt me
Right.
if there's something going on. And it really was a moment where I looked around and I was like, ugh. I just had that moment where I'm like, I'm not giving enough, and I don't know that I have enough in me to
Mhm.
give what this group needs. And
Gotcha.
again, I was at that point of like, well, I've learned a lot about how I can stay in control. There was also that line of safety.
Mhm.
And truly, it was one of the hardest days of my life, truly, to
Mhm.
be in a a system for 17 years and believe in it because I always said I never wanted to be part of the problem.
Right.
I wanted to be part of the solution. And to me, I was like, I'm not leaving the education field. That's a problem. We need people in
Mm-hmm.
there. And then, then I was like, my energy is not what these kids need. And that was hard because that's
Mm-hmm.
personal.
Mm-hmm.
And how to get to that point to realize my energy is not what's best for these kids. And it took those night conversations with my husband because truly I was contributing to our family financially, and to
Mm-hmm.
say, "Ah, I they need more, or I need more support
Right.
that I didn't necessarily have control over." And it took Jason, who's my husband, saying, write your letter. And again, that was the support that I needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I write my letter and I walk away from a field that's been part of who I am and that I believe in
Mm-hmm.
and is needed. And, but at the end of the day, too, things work out for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
because then I had an opportunity to come back to Grafton. Throughout those years, I also was in early intervention,
Mm-hmm.
which is birth to 3 support services. And that year and a half brought me back to, this is where my energy is. I need to work with people. And it helped remind me of like those early days of just being the good when people needed help. And it truly was like a healing year and a half of
Mm-hmm.
just remembering why we do what we do,
Mm-hmm.
and how we have high expectations for these people in our field. But when we have high expectations, it takes a high level of support.
Yeah.
So I've just said a
Yeah.
ton, Christopher. Let me give
Well,
you a
it's
chance
well,
to.
it's funny because before I knew your name, anything about you, I knew that you were part of early intervention, which in our Ukeru office, Ukeru's on one side of the building. Then there's like a hallway. Then the other side up front is our early intervention crew. And I never knew you, never talked to you, but every time I saw you, you always had like this friendly smile, like you knew me. But I was like, I don't know this lady. She just always looks friendly. So then when you came and interviewed with us, I was like, oh, okay, it's that person. Right. And
Yep.
then I found out you were Jason's wife, and I
Yeah.
never knew that until your interview. Never knew that. And I had traveled with Jason. I'd trained Jason when he was at Grafton and
Yep.
through his various roles.
Yep.
So what brought you to Ukeru then?
So during that year and a half, I'd always sneak over because Jason has nothing but wonderful things to say over the years. And like I said, I kind of cheated. I used the Ukeru mindset
Mm-hmm.
and philosophies and the thinking behind it. And through that process as well, my husband went back to school and did a lot of studying on trauma-informed care,
Mm-hmm.
and did a lot of reflection on this type of support. And mind you, like, he traveled with this team.
Mm-hmm.
He knew you guys, and they were part of our home conversations. And so I knew you. And before I came to Ukeru, I would watch the podcasts. They were fun. So I always felt like I knew you because you guys have talked so much about
Mm-hmm.
why everybody, that's in our office has come to our office. And
Mm-hmm.
truly, mind you, it's a job, but it's so much more than that. Just like teaching, it's a job, but it's so much more than that. At the end of the day, if we can go home and feel like we've given something back or have done good,
Mm-hmm.
then I feel like we can go to bed at night resting, knowing we've done what we feel like is good. And that's where it really brought me to Ukeru, because, like I said, early intervention was so meaningful and such a good transition to supporting people. And for me personally, why I believe what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was approached about the opportunity at Ukeru, and I was like, well, I've kind of lived the Grafton story
Mm-hmm.
and the development. Like, my family came in while the development of Ukeru
Mm-hmm.
was in process, and my husband and I, in our Change the World conversations, it was not only about work for him, it was this helps us be better parents
Yep.
and how to support partners in that process too when I need to tag out because a 2-year-old's having a fit. Like just how to treat someone with kindness.
Yeah.
And so it's been part of our life. So truly like thinking, knowing EI was so good for my soul. When I was given this opportunity, I was like, well, I've kind of been using it for years. So it felt like the right thing.
Hmm.
And truly, over the last almost year that I've been here, it's just been a natural part of my story. And you can't,
Mm.
again, here I come to planning. And my husband will say, she's a planner. She likes everything in the place. We can't plan everything. What we
Right.
can do is constantly every day go out, try to do the good,
Hmm.
and then come home and regroup. And like I don't know about you, but at night when I lay
Adapt.
down,
Yeah.
yeah, I debrief with myself. This went well, this didn't.
Yep.
How could I deal with this better? And I think if I live to 200, maybe I'll get it right.
If you live to 200, they're going to need a lot more hair and makeup on both of us.
No kidding. We'll need that budget increase.
That's right. That's right. Hopefully, they'll have better special effects for that back then.
Yeah, hopefully. A lot of
Made,
editing.
made Robert De Niro look a lot younger in that one movie. So
Yeah,
there's hope.
there
There's
is
hope.
hope. I don't know that I want to live to 200. Maybe I can get it
Yeah.
closer to who I want to be within the years that I'm given.
Yeah.
But
Now, you've obviously you work with Ukeru, but you've also been through the trainer certification of Ukeru, so you know what that's like.
mhm,
Um, and you've also, I imagine, had to be trained in different crisis intervention systems in your tenure working in the schools.
mhm.
Something I'll get a common skepticism is all I'm sure it's just like all the others. How would what's your take on that? Do you feel like it's just like all the other trainings you've been through, or what's been different for you?
The human aspect. Mind you, over the years, there's so many professional development opportunities and so many that I can say wonderful things about. But I think at the end of the day, the human aspect of Ukeru is different. It makes you think a little bit differently
Hmm.
about, well, we're all human, even watching the news at night and then processing where we're at as a society and culture.
Hmm.
Um, Knowing we're all human, trying to hit a mark.
Hmm.
And if we can think about the intentions and hitting that mark, and sometimes when we don't hit the mark, having the support there
Hmm.
to help you navigate it is so important. And if that person that's there to help doesn't understand, the navigation's going to get messier than it needs to be. And I think the way that Ukeru breaks that down is so powerful, not just in the workforce. And as an educator, truly, we know the challenges that they face are layered and deep, and the educators are human. So they're not perfect. They have their fight or flight. They have triggers that have been pulled day after day.
Hmm.
And then having that support is such a game changer. And I'm going to use, I worked with several amazing educators over the years, but I was in a co taught classroom for several years, and I worked with a co teacher that we just knew each other. And we knew when to take the lead or when to let the other person take the lead
Hmm.
because of our triggers and because of that relationship. I feel like they were some of the most powerful, impactful years in the education field.
Hmm.
And that wasn't necessarily because of a system that we were using in the schools,
Hmm.
but it was because of our understanding of humanity and the imperfections that exist
Hmm.
and the need to understand ourselves and know how to depend on each other and ask for help. And truly, again, that goes back to the things that Ukeru was based on and the philosophies behind it that I had been living for 10 years at that point
Hmm.
and knowledgeable of. And again, cheating because I was taking that mindset and supporting others through that. But again, knowing how to mesh with the supports that you have. And I think in these fields too, just like any other field, I'll use the healthcare field as an example. Um, you're always going to have good and bad everywhere.
Yep.
Um, and knowing that how to stay on the good, hopefully, but then also knowing that I know somebody's better at something and leaning on them for that, especially to support somebody in crisis. Unfortunately, I had a recent hospital stay. Everything's fine. It wasn't anything too dramatic, other than I was not at my best.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed people to stay at their best when I wasn't. And
Mm-hmm.
again, just in the last month, I was reminded of how important it is in stressful fields of when we're constantly exposed to someone who's not at their best. How do I stay at my best when
Yep.
someone's at their worst? And again, just living through it, this program speaks to it. And it went so much further than my professional life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's where this program really stands out. And I think you said this to me, Christopher. You said, "Well, we don't like to really like it's a crisis management system, but it's more than that. It's about humanity and how to treat each other."
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
I don't tell people Ukeru is a crisis intervention system because to me it's not. If you focus on crisis intervention, you're waiting until it's too late. To me, it's an
exactly.
approach to interacting with people.
Yeah,
So when you talk about, using it with your kids and everything, I do the same thing with how I interact with family and everything else because it's it's that type of thing.
yeah, yeah. And believe me, there's times that I've needed somebody to
Mm-hmm.
tag team in.
Yep.
And knowing that you have people that can do that for you gives you that ability to stay in control longer.
Yep.
And I think that's important. And the layers, I'm going back to your original question from 30 minutes ago. How has education changed? I think the years when I was leaving, or I knew it was my time to shift,
Mm-hmm.
is when I didn't always know that I had that. If I needed to tap out for a minute because my triggers have been hit and I wasn't staying at my best, I needed to know that I had the support. Again, high expectations, high level of support. And when you that doesn't align, that's where it gets really tricky. And that's where I saw the difference, the shift. There were so much needs coming through the door, and the expectations kept getting higher
Mm-hmm.
with more needs. I needed the support to match it, and it wasn't aligned, which then made me feel
Mm-hmm.
like I wasn't enough. And
Mm-hmm.
that was tough to leave at the end of the day being like, "Ugh, I wasn't enough. I didn't hit the mark." And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that person.
Yep.
I want to hit the mark.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't hit the mark, I at least want to stay in a good mindset to be to have that right energy. So
Right.
that's so flattering to hear that when you saw me, I had that energy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's definitely times that I don't, and it's sad. And I feel people's pain when they don't have it because
Mm-hmm.
maybe they don't have the level of support that is needed to match their challenges.
Yep. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me here today.
Thanks for talking, Chris.
And I'm sure it's a mystery why we have Angie being our lead outreach person. I'm sure it's a complete mystery why we have her talk to folks. So,
Well, it's so much fun, truly.
mhm,
Even on those days where it's a hustle, it is so fun to hear about people's stories across the country
mhm,
and beyond about where they're at in their fields and the challenges that exist. And I often say, like even on the call yesterday, I said, we hear this all the time. And it
yep,
does break my heart because it is that level of support that needs to be there to keep our service fields energized and able to support the level of needs that exist. So that's why when I say thank you for your service on the other side of that call, I
mhm,
truly mean it.
yeah,
Thank you for staying in it. And if we can support you, that's what we're here to do.
perfect. Perfect way to end it. Thank you all for joining us. This has been episode 21. Take care.